It's a utility-first ideology that makes building modern, responsive websites faster and easier. Unlike Bootstrap, and design, or material control systems exactly while keeping components, Tailwind's ecosystem handleries let you build your real company sample show classes with thing. This is exactly how Tailwind CSS works. Every Tailwind simplicity, but rerun the turn into this crash course thread. Tailwind Play, an interactive online playground through there. For example, we can very easily style this of dash this nice Tailwind CSS color. And now if you want to apply some kind of apply a Tailwind different sections. All includes everything Tailwind Tailwind generates, including default styles and theme-based utilities. Next, there's Theme, which contains the Tailwind CSS built-in theme variables like colors, spacing, and more. There's Base, which includes global styles like removing default margins from the body element. And then there's the custom component styles. I'll teach you how that works later. And finally, the most important part, which are the utilities. It contains the actual CSS generated for each utility that you use. For example, right now in our HTML, we have only text center, text LG, cyan 400, and margin top of 2. So let's see how each one of these utility classes looks like when converted to plain CSS. MT2 applies a margin top where they calculate some kind of a spacing here. This is super nice because they're using CSS variables to make the whole system super modular. They're not using absolute values. Text center simply applies a text align property of center. Text LG not only changes the font size, which is what you would assume, but also modifies the line height to make it look better. And then cyan 400 simply changes the color. So if you quickly change this color from cyan to maybe something like green, you can see that it automatically gets replaced with another style right here. And what that means is that Tailwind CSS generates styles on the fly, only for the classes we actually use. This keeps our CSS lean and efficient. Think of it like a Thanos finger snap. Change a class and the styles adjust instantly. Now, let's continue experimenting with some background colors, spacings, font styles, and borders. Create a new div element that'll wrap the H1 that we have right here. That'll look something like this, and we can indent it properly. Now, we can apply a class to this div and give it a bg-violet-200 color. We can also give it an h of 10 for the height, a W full, so it takes the full width of the container, border-2, border-violet-600, rounded-MD to round up the corners a bit, margin Y of 4 to divide it a bit from the top and bottom, and padding of 2. We can also change the H1 a bit by giving it a font of mono, font-extra bold. And there we go. It says hello world. And we never entered another file. We did everything within this HTML, or later on this will be JSX or even TSX file, because Tailwind is widely used in React and Next.js. So let me actually break down what happened here. W-full and H10 are width and height properties. The full simply sets the width to 100% of the container, and H10 simply provides about 2.5 rem or about 40 pixels of height. BG Violet 200 applies a background color, and 200 stands for a shade simply of that color. Next, border 2 and border violet 600 simply apply a border, first by giving it a border width, and of course, this gives it a border color. Rounded MD applies a medium border radius to make the corners rounded. Margin Y of 4 is interesting. Border radius gives it apply a border, first border 2 and border violet 600, simply apply a border, first by giving it a border width, and of course, this gives it a border color. Rounded MD applies a medium border radius to make the corners rounded. Margin Y of 4 is interesting. It applies a margin, but why margin Y? Well, you could have done margin top, which would apply something on the top. You can do margin left for left, right for right, or bottom for bottom. Or you can use Y for top and bottom, like Y-axis, or X for left and right. It's super flexible. The full notation looks something like this. You say M, and then you can either apply top, right, bottom, left, or Y or X, and then the size you want to apply it. And the same thing goes left. Full notation looks something like this. You say M, and then you can either apply top, right, bottom, left, or Y or X, and then the size you want to apply it. And the same thing goes with the padding. You can say padding, top, bottom, left, right, X, Y, whatever you want to do, or if you don't apply anything, it'll apply it on all sides. Finally, we have text center, which you already know what it does. Font simply applies a font family, and this changes the font weight. And while we're here, we can also have a quick lesson on margins and paddings. Many developers confuse the two. Margin is an external spacing, which pushes the element away from others, while padding is internal spacing side, so it's easier to see what's happening, and also from the bottom, even though we cannot see it. And if I increase the padding to something like padding of 6, you'll see that it adds a flex quantities. There we go. So now you know a bit more about different types of properties that we can apply to different elements using Tailwind. The possibilities are really endless, and even though it might seem like I'm coming up with these names off the top of my head, memorizing them is super simple once you get the hang of it. And of course, another pro tip is if you want to figure out what the actual CSS value of a specific property is, just hover over it and you'll see exactly what it does. They even provided this nice comment to tell you exactly how many rems or pixels padding of 6 applies. This was simple. Simple and fairly high level. But in the next lesson, I'll let you know the Tailwind superpower. Tailwind CSS isn't just about predefined utility classes. It's also incredibly flexible thanks to its just-in-time compiler, also known as JIT. The JIT compiler generates styles on demand, which means that Tailwind only includes the exact styles your project uses, keeping your final CSS small and efficient. For example, let's say you want to rename this H1 to jsmastery.pro, which is the URL of a code platform we've been building for months that allows you to create custom learning paths. And also, let's say you want to give it a font size of something like 13 pixels, which is not a predefined Tailwind utility. Normally, you would have to create an inline style or give it a custom class, but with the JIT compiler, you can do this instead. Text-13 pixels within square brackets, just like this. Or you can do something like 20 or even 30. It is completely up to you. Any value you want, you can apply it automatically, and the JIT compiler will add it to the generated CSS, removing all the unused style, only keeping the used ones, keeping your CSS bundle as small as possible. So why is this JIT compiler such a big thing? Well, first of all, because it optimizes performance, generating only what you need. It gives you faster build times because it doesn't need to pre-compile thousands of different classes. It supports arbitrary values, which means that you can pass any custom size, color, or property to make your website super unique. And it works seamlessly in both development and production. And the best part is that it is completely built into Tailwind by default without any extra setup. So now that you understand the core mechanics behind how Tailwind CSS works, let's move on to layouts and flexbox, because knowing how to style elements is useless if you don't know how to position them. Tailwind provides powerful utilities for structuring layouts with positioning, display properties, flexbox, and grid. So let's go over them one by one. Most of the time, you'll see yourself using display, position, and maybe sometimes overflow CSS properties. So let's first talk about positioning. Positioning defines where an element appears relative to its container or the viewport. There's a position of relative, which moves the element relative to its normal position. Then there's absolute, which moves it to the nearest parent. There's also a fixed position, which sticks the element to the viewport so it doesn't scroll, as well as position sticky, which makes it behave normally until scrolled to a certain point. For example, if you create a red 10 by 10 square and you give it a top 0 property, it'll be fixed at the top of the page regardless of your scroll position. Then, much more important than position, there's display, and specifically flexbox in Tailwind. It determines how an element behaves in terms of layout and visibility within the document. It's one of those must-have CSS skills for creating responsive layouts, and the moment you master flex, well, you can flex on everyone. There's display block, which simply takes up the full width. There's display inline, which behaves like text, which means that it doesn't have any width or height. And finally, there are two very powerful display properties. The first one is flex, which enables flexbox, and the second one is display grid, which enables the CSS grid properties. So let's start by exploring flexbox in action. I'll create a new div that has a class equal to flex, which just enables flexbox. Then I'll give it justify-end, which will align the items within the container to the right. And finally, space-x-6, which will add some spacing in between the elements. So let's add that inner element of div, and we can also just immediately close it. I'll give it a class equal to h of 16 for the height, w of 16 for the width, rounded-full to make it into a circle, and a bg of blue 500. Now I'll duplicate this div right below 2 times. And immediately you'll see 3 different circles. Let's also apply a bit of a margin top of 2 to give them some space. And let's change the colors. Let's go with blue, orange, and green. There we go. Oh, and it looks like I almost remade the letterbox logo. That was fun. But hey, just by putting these 3 different divs right here, you can play with the flex layout. Maybe change it from justify end to justify around, baseline, between, center, end, evenly, whatever you want to do, you can totally do it and see it happening live right here. But what if you want to have a column-based layout where the elements are not one next to another, but rather one on top of the other? Well, you can do that very easily by assigning it a flex-col property. And immediately you'll see three different circles. Let's also apply a bit of a margin top of 2 to give them some space. And let's change the colors. Let's go with blue, orange, and green. There we go. Oh, and it looks like I almost remade the letterbox logo. That was fun. But hey, just by putting these three different divs right here, you can play with the flex layout. Maybe change it from justify end to justify around, baseline, between, center, end, evenly, whatever you want to do, you can totally do it and see it happening live right here. But what if you want to have a column-based layout where the elements are not one next to another, but rather one on top of the other? Well, you can do that very easily by assigning it a flex-col between, center, and and evenly, whatever you want to do, you can totally do it and see it happening live right here. But what if you want to have a column-based layout where the elements are not one next to another, but rather one on top of the other? Well, you can do that very easily by assigning it a flex-col property, which stands for column. And of course, if you want to modify how the elements appear on a column, instead of using justify properties, you can use items-properties. So you can center them, end them, start them, stretch them. You can do whatever you want with it. For now, I can just put justify center, item center as well, and give it a space y of 6 instead of x of 6. And now we have 3 vertical circles. Now these circles could be anything. They could be divs, they could be images. You're free to move the content however you'd like across the screen, allowing you to create any kind of layout. Even this Tailwind screen that you're seeing right now is just a series of rectangles. In CSS, everything is a rectangle. See this part right here? Well, it's a rectangle. This preview window, also a rectangle. This button, well, I think you can guess it. And that's exactly what makes Flexbox positioning super useful. And if you want to practice some Flexbox or learn it for the first time, there's a game called Flexbox Froggy that helps you learn Flexbox. The goal of the game is simple. You just have to move the frog from water to its pond. So in this case, you need to apply a justify content of flex end. And trust me, the levels get much more difficult, so you'll have to really practice it and know your way around it. This is a property that we used not that long ago. It's justify content space around. Okay, it's good. My CSS game is still on point. Now, let's practice some CSS grid within Tailwind. Transforming this code to a CSS grid is super simple. Let's just remove the flex and flex-col properties, as well as the item center and justify center. Heck, we can remove everything. And let's just apply a grid property, as well as grid-cols-3, which stands for 3 columns. And we can also apply a gap of 2 in between the elements. We can also give it a margin top of 2 to divide it from the top, and a margin x of 2 to divide it from the corners. Now, what's cool about this grid is that if you don't provide it the width, it'll naturally expand to fill its space. You can do similar things with Flexbox, but Grid makes it super simple to fill out the entire width or height of something. So, in simple words, this code right here creates a 3-column layout. You can change it to something like 5, which will make it a 5-column layout, giving us space for 2 more elements. As with Flexbox, there's many other grid properties that you can use, from columns, rows, flows, and more, to truly master it. And if you're new to CSS Grid, well, there's no frogs here, but a grid garden. It works very similarly to Flexbox Froggy, but it doesn't have as good of a name. Here, you can move different things around to grow your garden. So with that in mind, you now know the basics of how we can position your elements within a layout using Grid and Flexbox in Tailwind CSS. Of course, these are just native CSS properties, but Tailwind makes it super simple to use them. How to make your websites look good on all different kinds of devices? Well, Tailwind makes responsive design easy by using mobile-first breakpoints. It gives you a set of predefined device widths, ranging from small, medium, and large to extra large. What's cool about them is that by default, they set a min width, which means that it sets styles for a specific screen width or larger, not smaller, okay? That means that we're talking about a mobile-first methodology. Still, you're open to use something known as a max width to set up styles for a specific screen width or smaller. But as I said, Tailwind is mobile-first, so the min width queries will be applied by default. Now, let me show you how that works in practice. Let's say that we have a div, and that div will render a p tag that'll say something like, I appear on screens wider than 768 pixels. Let's also give it a class equal to text-white. Perfect, here it is. Now, how would we actually make this piece of text do what it says it's gonna do? Well, very easily. By giving this outer div a class of medium devices block, but typically hidden. So what this means is that we will apply a display of none, but only on medium devices where media width is greater than or equal to 48 rem, which is about 770 pixels. Then we change the display to block. So now if I move this around a bit, you can see the width on the top right, and if I expand it over 768 pixels, there we go, you can see that it appears right here. So these 2 characters in a column right here are what's called a media query. Media queries allow you to change CSS properties depending on the screen width. Now, on top of being able to change the display properties of certain elements, using media queries, you can change whatever you want. So let me make this always visible, but let's change the text background color depending on different screen sizes. We start with small, and on small, we can give it a background of something like, well, you know what? We can already start with these predefined colors. I'll go from 500 all the way until the end. So let's start with 500. And now if we go over 640 pixels, you'll be able to see it right here. But what happens if we change it to medium, something like BG Amber of 700? Well then, if you go even wider, you'll see that it'll change once again. So there's one thing that we can deduct from this, and that is that larger screen sizes will always override the smaller ones. Even though here it says that the width has to be greater than 40 rems, which it is in this case as well, but still, this one is not being applied because the medium one is being applied because it's greater than 48 rems, even though both of them are true. But you can also flip it around on its head by using the max width media queries. As I said, by default, Tailwind uses min width, but if you say max SM or if you say max MD, then it'll be applying that only if the width is lower than that specific size. So now you can see that currently it's like this, but then we increase it, it changes again. So you have two different ways of targeting different elements. Tailwind's doc page on this is super useful. You can see the different breakpoints that they recommend, and you have a couple of examples of a simple marketing page component that uses a stack layout on a small screen and a side-by-side layout on larger screens, which means that you have full control over how it works. The only thing you have to do is play with the media queries. They even give you a full explanation of that example. And right below, they mentioned the mobile-first approach that I was telling you of that page, and this one is not being a later of 700. What happens if we change it to medium, something like BG Amber of 700? Well then, if you go even wider, you'll see that it'll change once again. So there's one thing that we can deduct from this, and that is that larger screen sizes will always override the smaller ones. Even though here it says that the width has to be greater than 40 rems, which it is in this case as well, but still, this one is not being applied because the medium one is being applied because it's greater than 48 rems, even though both of them are true. But you can also flip it around on its head by using the max width media queries. As I said, by default, Tailwind uses min width, but if you say max SM or if you say max MD, then it'll be applying that only if the width is lower than that specific size. So now you can see that currently it's like this, but then we increase it, it changes again. So you have two different ways of targeting different elements. Tailwind's doc page on this is super useful. You can see the different breakpoints that they recommend, and you have a couple of examples of a simple marketing page component that uses a stack layout on a small screen and a side-by-side layout page. You can see the two different ways of targeting different elements. Tailwind's doc page on this is super useful. You can see the different breakpoints they recommend, and you have a couple of examples of a simple marketing page component that uses a stack layout on a small screen and a side-by-side layout on larger screens, which means that you have full control over how it works. The only thing you have to do is play with the media queries. They even give you a full explanation of that example. And right below, they mentioned the mobile-first approach that I was telling you about. This means that unprefixed utilities, like uppercase, take effect on all screen sizes, while prefixed utilities, like empty uppercase, only take effect on specified breakpoint, the end above being the keyword right here. So getting back to our example, without using the max prefix, just using the regular small and medium, small will only work on small and above, and medium will only work on medium and above. Keep that in mind. If there's only one thing you take away from this lesson, then it's that Tailwind uses a mobile-first approach, and it looks at the media query and above. Or if you want to switch it around, then you apply a max before it. And I might be repeating myself a bit here, but I think it's important to dive a bit deeper into this. Because while it doesn't click, it's going to feel weird. So Tailwind even has another section on it. What surprises people the most about the mobile-first approach is that to style something for mobile, you need to use the unprefixed version of a utility, not the small prefix version. Don't think of small as on small screens. Think of it as at the small breakpoint. So do not use small to target mobile devices, because this will only center text on screens 640 and wider, not on small screens. Rather, use unprefixed utilities to immediately target mobile by default, okay? So the text will center on mobile by default, and then only change it if you want to change it for larger devices. And I think this dives right into the reason of what mobile-first approach means in the first place, and that is that it's a good idea to implement the mobile layout for a design first, and then layer on any changes that make sense for small screens, followed by medium screens, and so on. And of course, it's super important to mention that you can fully customize your breakpoints. If you want to make sure that it works on specific types of devices, or your specific layout breaks on specific widths, well, you can fully customize the exact breakpoints you want to add, such as extra small or even triple XL. And remember the just-in-time compiler? It allows you to or even triple XL. And the exact breakpoints you want to add, such as extra small or even triple XL. And remember the just-in-time compiler? It allows you to provide arbitrary values, which means that you can say min 320 pixels and then apply something for that specific screen width. Pretty cool, right? Well, with that in mind, you know more about media queries than most people out there. So put it to good use and remember to design and develop mobile first. Apparently, we developers love dark mode. A recent study on Medium.com reveals that more than 70% of software engineers decide to use the dark mode theme for their IDEs. But it's not just the IDEs. We love dark websites too. So let me teach you how to apply styles for different themes like light and dark mode. Tailwind supports dark mode natively. You just have to add the dark keyword before class. Let me show you. I'll create a div, and this div will have a class equal to bg white, and in there I can say something like dark mode disabled because it's white, right? But now the only thing I have to do is say on dark mode, apply a background of black. And with that, we have technically enabled our dark mode, but we cannot see the text. So what do we have to do? Well, by default, we can make the text black, but on dark mode, we can make it white by saying text-white. And with that, our dark mode is working. And the way it knows that I want to have my dark mode enabled is based on system or browser preferences. So on your operating system or in your browser, you can try to switch to light mode. My eyes hurt, and immediately you'll see that this part also got changed to white. or if I decide to switch to dark mode, that's much better. This has changed immediately. Just by prefixing the dark properties. But now, often in our websites, you'll also have to create your own toggle to allow the weirdos to switch to the light mode. Just kidding, I like using it sometimes too. So to make this work, we'll have to modify the configuration to include a special dark class. There are two ways to toggle dark mode manually. You can use the prefers color scheme and override the dark variant to use your custom selector, or you can use something known as a data attribute to automatically activate the theme. For this demo, I'll go with the toggling dark mode manually approach that allows us to add custom directives in the CSS file just above the theme directive. So let me copy this part right here, and back in our playground, I'll head over to CSS and I'll add the add custom variant of dark where .dark and .dark everything turns on the dark mode. If we don't specify this, the theme will automatically adapt based on the user's operating system. Pretty cool, right? You only need to mention this if you want to allow users to switch between the themes on their websites. It's a choice you can give them. So, whatever utilities or styles Tailwind provides, just add the dark before them, and you're all set. Those utilities will only take effect when the theme is set to dark. Otherwise, they won't have any impact. Now, I prepared a very quick code example, which I'll give access to somewhere below this lesson or within the GitHub README of this project, where we have a card, and within that card, we have an H3 and a P tag, as well as a button. This button has a manual JavaScript on-click handler. color, which simply adds a class of dark. This then targets the DOM and applies that class class of dark to the browser. So now if you click it, you can see that we can toggle it on or off dark to the browser class of dark. This then targets JavaScript on-click handler, which class of dark to the class of dark. This then targets the DOM and applies that class of dark as a class of dark. It's a manual JavaScript on-click handler button. And the we're all set. Those you to impact. Now, I prepared a very quick code example, which I'll give access to somewhere below this lesson or within the GitHub README of this project, where we have a card, and within that card, we have an H3 and a P tag, as well as a button. This button has a manual JavaScript on-click handler, which simply adds a class of dark. Now allows here with the less on manually on to make the developers happy. Tailwind makes your life easy, but just how customizable is it? I already told you that you can make everything fully custom. But let's say you want to introduce a new color that isn't present in method and find available. Do that very easy of it. So your name and a custom font, I can remove the class entirely because the H3 by default will get all of these properties applied to it. I can do the same thing with a P tag and even different elements from ShatCN and giving them some variance. But the best thing about it is, if you want to give it a class name and change its color, you can just use native Tailwind here as well by saying class name text, of course. By now, you've got a solid understanding of Tailwind's core concepts, and you're well on your way to mastering utility-first styling. But
hello friends! Today we are gonna create this beautiful portfolio page using Tailwind by creating Tailwind that we need. And create this dark mode toggle, your favorite hosting provider for true and depends your now your panel manage your. Okay, firstly I want to show you some features of Tailwind before starting our project, so it will be easier for beginners. Of course, I will not talk about what the Tailwind is, all those boring introductions. If you are watching this, so let's say to do, and let's say this color, and I want to make this div full screen. Remember how we are using this in CSS? We are using hide